Welcome to the Southern Ohio Farm Show. This is Gigi Neal of OSU Extension in Claremont County, Agricultural and Natural Resources Educator.
I'm James Morris, the Agricultural and Natural Resources and Community Development Educator for the Ohio State University Extension in Brown County.
Hello, my name is Richard Purdon. I'm with the Ohio State University Extension. I am the Ag and Natural Resource Educator for Adams County and the Community Development Educator for Adams County, Ohio.
And I'm Brooke Beam, the Ohio State University Extension Educator for Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Community Development in Highland County. And we will be your hosts for the Southern Ohio Farm Show.
We've all had maple syrup on pancakes and waffles, but there's a variety of other uses that you can use maple syrup for in your kitchen. If you haven't tried maple syrup over vanilla ice cream, that's also a very unique flavor to try and makes for a very sweet dessert. However, for our examples for today, we're going to cover maple ham loaf glaze, a sweet potato casserole, and maple cookies. So first, we'll start with a ham loaf glaze, which consists of a 1/3 cup of pineapple juice and a 1/3 cup of maple syrup. To make this glaze, you will combine both ingredients in a pan on the stove and bring to a boil. Once you have combined your two different ingredients of the pineapple juice and the maple syrup, and the mixture has come to a boil, you will apply it to the top of your ham loaf. So a ham loaf should be cooked at 350 degrees to an internal temperature of 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And usually this takes around an hour and a half to accomplish. So as you're baking the ham loaf, you'll want to be sure to apply the glaze, about half of the glaze prior to baking, and then using the remaining half of your glaze mixture that you have throughout the rest of the baking period and a little bit right at the very end. For maple sweet potato casserole, you'll need 9 sweet potatoes, 1 tablespoon of canola or vegetable oil, 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter that are chopped up into tablespoon-sized portions, a 1/3 cup of maple syrup, 3/4 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, salt, cayenne pepper, and mini marshmallows to your preference. So you'll want to put this in the oven when you're cooking your ham loaf, so the oven will need to be at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll first want to rub oil over the sweet potatoes and then poke holes in it to make sure that they are ready to cook. Place the sweet potatoes in the oven on a piece of foil. After an hour of cooking, you'll bring them out and skin the potatoes and take the inside of the meat of the potato and put that in a pot where you'll add the butter, maple syrup, and cinnamon, and make sure to mash it to a smooth consistency. Once you have completed that, you'll transfer your mixture once you're happy with the taste. If you want to add salt or cayenne pepper, that's up to you. Transfer that into a casserole dish and then apply the mini marshmallows across the top. You can add as many or as few as you like, and then place the casserole dish back into the oven until the marshmallows complete the amount of marshmallow toasting that you would like them to have. And then finally, for a sweet maple dessert, are maple icebox cookies.
To make maple cookies, we take 3½ cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar, 1 cup of soft maple sugar, which I didn't have today, so we're going to use brown sugar. One well-beaten egg, a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 3/4 cups of softened butter, and finally, 1/2 cup of maple syrup.
Once you have formed all of your ingredients, you'll mix them into a dough and then roll them out into logs, and you'll place them into the freezer to chill for 8 hours. After they have been chilled and they are all combined, slice your cookie dough into about 1/4 inch thick slices and place them on a cookie sheet that is lined with parchment. Once you get all of your cookies sliced and ready to go, you will cook them for about 8 to 10 minutes at 350 degrees in the oven. Once you remove your cookies from the oven, you'll want to apply a maple cream, which basically is a further process of maple syrup. It has the consistency of butter or icing, and it makes for a really great icing on these cookies, but it also can be applied, the maple cream can be applied to English muffins or other things that like toast, but it is a very sweet and confectionery taste to it. So these are definitely decadent cookies that have a strong maple flavor. So I hope that you enjoy the different varieties of ways to use maple syrup in your kitchen and explore using Ohio maple syrup in your dinner sometime here soon.
Hi, I'm Dave Apsley. I'm a forester and a natural resources specialist with Ohio State University Extension. Today I'm at Lake Alma State Park. If you look over my shoulder here, you'll see a portion of the lake, which is near Wellston, Ohio. And I'd like to introduce you to a cousin of our state tree. This is yellow buckeye. Yellow buckeye occurs here in the unglaciated Allegheny Plateau in southeastern Ohio. It also follows the Ohio River in the counties that are adjacent to the river down to Cincinnati and beyond into Indiana. And it typically grows in this hill country on slopes that are facing north or east in real rich sites with things like basswood and yellow poplar. It has very many similarities to our Ohio buckeye, which typically is more in the glaciated portion of the state to the north and west, but it will also occur down here in the southern part of the state along broad floodplains. Like Ohio buckeye, it has leaves that are arranged in an opposite manner. So leaves, wherever you've got one leaf, you're going to have one on the opposite side of the branch. You're also going to have a compound leaf, which is palmately compound. So you've got a little stalk called a rachis, and you'll typically have 5 leaflets on the end of that rachis that all come together at the same point at the palm of your hand. Those leaflets will have a serrated margin, so they'll have teeth along the edge, and overall length of the leaflet is usually should be between about 8 and 15 inches in total length from the base to the tip of the leaflets. These leaves, like Ohio buckeye leaves, can come out very early in the springs. The buds will break, and the leaves will form very early in the spring, usually about the end of this month. Today is March 1st, so by about the end of the month, we're going to start seeing buckeye leaves starting to pop. As far as buds, they're very similar, and twigs are very similar to Ohio buckeye. Ohio buckeye is also known as fetid buckeye, so if you scratch the twig on an Ohio buckeye, you're going to get this fetid smell. You typically don't find that with yellow buckeye. They both have large terminal buds that can be probably 3/4 to almost an inch in length, got multiple scales. The Ohio buckeye scales tend to have a nice keel or ridge down the center of the bud scale, where yellow buckeyes tend to be more rounded in shape. They will both form vertical clusters of flowers, and eventually they'll form fruits. The fruits, or the buckeyes, are going to be in husk, so it's a husk that surrounds the nuts. With yellow buckeye, there are usually multiples in that husk, and the whole husk with the nuts inside can be almost baseball size, but that husk will be smooth. Ohio buckeye husks tend to be bumpy or warty, so that's another way to tell them apart. And then the buckeyes themselves inside. Yellow buckeye tends to be more of a reddish brown color, where Ohio buckeye is a deep ebony or really dark colored buckeye. As far as bark, when they're younger tree, they'll tend to be a smooth gray bark, and then you'll start getting plates. The plates can be an inch or two across, and then as the tree gets larger, they'll tend to have larger plates. This is a massive buckeye. It's almost 40 inches in diameter and probably close to 100 feet in height. It's not uncommon for yellow buckeye to make it up into the canopy of these beautiful stands of trees and be right up there with these big tall yellow poplar and basswoods and other trees that are up in the canopy. So it tends to be a much larger tree, tends to be up on the slopes, where the Ohio buckeye tends to somewhat be in the understory of the forest and will eventually can work its way up into the canopy. So again, this is yellow buckeye. Thank you, and please be sure to spend at least part of your day in the woods.
Hello, I'm Tony Nye, the Clinton County Educator for Ag and Natural Resources.
I'm Ken Ford, and I'm the Ag and Natural Resource Educator here in Fayette County. And Tony and I are here today. We're going to talk about 3 species of weeds that probably almost every farmer in Ohio probably needs to know about and be able to identify and understand what it is that is growing in our fields in the summer and how to go about taking care of it.
As we move into the planting season, you know, we will be busy, but certainly, as Ken said, we need to be keeping a watchful eye on our fields once our crops are planted for weed development. And the 3 weeds that we have here belong to the pigweed family, and as a result, they all have differences about them. And it's critical that we get them identified early, because as time goes and these weeds get established in our fields, control measures become more difficult. So it's important that you start and scouting your fields early. And if you have an indication that you've got a problem with one of these 3 weeds, that you have a game plan put together for good control. And the other thing is that we just don't want these to get established in our fields as best as possible. And so again, scouting becomes very, very important in the initial phase of identification.
And one of the things that we want to point out is, as we look at the size of these weeds, we look at the size here. This is when we need to be scouting and need to be identifying these weeds, because if we're finding the weeds and they're this size or like this one over here, the way of being able to control those weeds are going to be very difficult. So we want to point out some of the characteristics of these and try to help you identify what each of these samples are. We'll start over here. Tony, you want to talk about the first one?
This first one is the Palmer amaranth. And a couple of quick things that we want to discuss is the shape of the leaf. It's more broad at the lower part of the leaf, so more egg in shape. And as we look at the different weeds on these, or the different leaves on these stems, we want to consider how long the petiole. The petiole is what's attached to the bottom of the leaf to the stem of the weed. And in terms of the Palmer amaranth weed, we generally will see some of these petioles literally longer than the leaves. So they extend, if we fold that petiole over at the base of the leaf and it extends past the tip of the leaf, that is a good indication that we're dealing with Palmer. The size of the leaf, the width of the base of the leaf are critical. And then the other thing that will differentiate compared to some pigweed family members is it has a smooth, no hairs on the stem. We will see little hair-like growths at the nodes where the petiole is attached. And so we want to keep in mind that when we're looking for proper identification, we get beyond just the leaf or the height of the leaf. We look at the stem, we look at what else is going on with the particular weed. So, as I said, with Palmer, we want to look at the shape of the leaf, we want to look at the length of the petiole, and we want to look at what the stem itself looks like and look for these little single hairs, and then it's a smooth stem.
The next one we want to talk about is a close second to the Palmer amaranth, and this is water hemp. Some guys that, as we do pesticide education programs, they'll say, well, yeah, I know we've got Palmer, or I've had Palmer, but more than likely they've got water hemp in some of their fields as well. This is one that doesn't get identified very often. One thing that we would point out is the Palmer and the water hemp are both on the noxious weed list, so they are at a pretty high risk of being hard to control, and we do need to pay attention to these. So as we look at the identification of this plant compared to the Palmer, we look at the leaf of these, and they're much thinner, more elongated, has a very short petiole compared to the Palmer. And one other key factor to this plant compared to the Palmer is you will notice it's a little shinier leaf. It almost has like an oil content to it, so it has a little bit of a shine. So that is another key factor in identifying the water hemp. It does have a smooth stem. There's virtually no hair on the stem of the water hemp, even at the nodes, and similar to the Palmer, there's really no indication of any hair whatsoever. When this matures a little more, it's not nearly as hardy of a plant as the Palmer is, but again, it is most of the water hemp is glyphosate resistant, so Roundup won't kill it. So you have to have a good management program to try to control this weed sample. So again, you want to try to identify them more at this level, because they get to this size or bigger, they're going to be a lot harder to control out in your farm fields. But again, look at the leaf itself is more elongated and narrow with a little shine.
The pigweed, this is red root pigweed, and the biggest characteristic that's different about this is when you look at the stem, it will have many tiny hairs along the stem of the plant. The shape of the leaf is a little shorter, a little wider throughout. This would be a good representation where it's not really egg-shaped. It's got some ovalness to it, but it's as wide up here as it is at the lower area of the leaf. Again, the petiole can be, this would be a comparison between the Palmer and the pigweed red root species. So definitely some differences in the characteristics. The other thing to keep in mind about the red root pigweed is, again, it doesn't have the little single hairs on the stem, but as you look at the underneath of the leaf and the stems itself, you'll see, as a real close look, a very hairy stem compared to the other two species. As Ken alluded to a little bit, they are on the noxious weed as far as the Palmer and the water hemp. They are many times ALS resistant, glyphosate resistant. We are finding many modes of action across the Midwest that these two species in particular are hard to control because they're resistant to many different types of herbicides and modes of action. As Ken alluded to, we want to try and identify these weeds when they're below 3 inches, because that's when the control is most efficient and effective. And when we start getting into height that's in that 8 to 10 inch range, we start losing ground on how well we can control these. Palmer amaranth itself, the female plant can produce up to 1 million seeds per one plant. So they survive by producing lots of new generation. And they can germinate, all of these species can germinate pretty much through the growing season, beginning in early May, and we can even find them germinating and starting in the fall. So they're a very prolific plant that generates lots of seeds, Palmer generating the most at up to 1 million seeds per individual plant. But they survive by mass producing themselves and getting out of control.
One thing we did not illustrate today with the samples that we have is what the seed head looks like. The Palmer is very well known for a very long, elongated seed head, which accommodates that 1 million seeds per plant, whereas the water hemp has more of a gangly type seed head, not nearly as prominent as that long, almost like a stick-looking seed head as the Palmer plant. The water hemp is more gangly, very sparsely populated, but again, produces a lot of seeds. So both of these together, you have 1 million seeds from one plant, and say, for example, 25% of those germinate next spring. That's still 250,000 plants that's going to germinate from one plant here during the growing season. So lots of seeds. One benefit to this is their seed life in the soil is 3 to 5 years. So if you can keep these under control, you can try to get it knocked out of your field. But again, it's going to take some management and some working with it to make sure that you can get rid of it in your field. Spray, you need to have a good pre-emerge program and a residual so that you can get this on through the growing season. As Tony talked about, we've seen these germinate on into September before some of these even start germinating, and by that time, any of your spray programs, you're going to be past any time that you're going to be able to spray these. So then it becomes a problem that we need to rogue those weeds, and none of us want to be out there pulling weeds in 1st of September when it's 90 degrees out.
One of the things that you want to keep in mind too, early on, when the weeds are even smaller than this, if you start thinking, okay, well, is it Palmer, is it red root pigweed, or is it water hemp? The name of the game with these two specifically, because they are so invasive, they're on the noxious weed list, is if you think it's one of them, you need to go ahead and decide, I have them both, and I'm going to control in that manner. Because sometimes when they're small like this, they are a little more difficult to differentiate between the two species because the leaves are very similar at a very young age. And again, remember, we don't want them to get much more than 4 or 5 inches tall because our efficacy with the spray products that do a good job become limited as to how effective they are. One other thing we want to point out, all of us in OSU Extension at all the counties, so whether it's Fayette County or Clinton County or if you're in another county, we have great resources that the Weed Science Department at Ohio State has provided us. There are some excellent video and that you can get by going to the Ohio Corn newsletter online. The Weed Control Guide for 2021 has a lot of information and products that can do a very good job of control. And so as we move forward into the growing season, start putting a game plan together because you may have seen something similar to these and you wondered exactly, well, do I or don't I? So use that as a mechanism to get out and scout early. If you find that you have them or you think you do, treat it as so. And don't let them get to seed production because that's where the next generation, the next year, and the year after that can get very invasive and really take over a field to where they are non-productive for commercial crop production.